Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the Virtual Emergency Operations Center, EOC, by Mark Demski and Anthony DeGeorge. Mark is a senior account executive with VOC. He's a retired lieutenant from the Baltimore County Fire Department, a retired deputy director of Baltimore County Emergency Management, and the former deputy sheriff. Mark is a current nationally registered and Maryland paramedic and also a certified emergency manager. Anthony DeGeorge is a solutions engineer with VOC. He's an instructor in the following subjects for the Center for Domestic Preparedness courses: hospital emergency response training, standardized awareness framework for healthcare emergency management, also known as FRAME. And he has 13 years as a New York State paramedic, as well as over 3 years as an emergency management coordination of Northwell Health. Thank you both for all your service. And before we welcome our presenters to the stage, be sure and mute your microphones and stop your video. If you have questions, you can go ahead and enter them in the chat, and Mark and Anthony will get to them sometime after their presentation. But for now, it's my pleasure to introduce Mark and Anthony. Welcome to the virtual stage.
Hello, my name is Mark Demski. I'm with VOC. We're here to present the Virtual EOC. Today, again, my name is Mark Demski. I'm a senior account executive with VOC. I'm also a certified emergency manager and a national registered paramedic. With me today is Anthony DeGeorge. Anthony has an extensive background that we'll speak about in a second, but he's also part of our solutions team, and he's a critical asset to the VOC team. Anthony, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everybody. As Mark said, my name is Anthony DeGeorge. I am a solutions engineer for VOC. Mostly work with healthcare and public health customers. My background is primarily healthcare. I spent many years as a first responder, began my volunteer experience in 2001, spent 13 years as a New York State paramedic, most of that time with Northwell Health in New York, the largest health system in the New York metro area. After my career in emergency medical services, I spent about almost 4 years with our corporate emergency management department at Northwell, overseeing emergency management for our 23 hospitals, about 800 ambulatory sites, as well as our about 75,000 employees. Happy to be here today and speaking to you all about what the virtual EOC means in today's climate. And turn it back over to you, Mark.
Thank you. So again, Mark Demski. I am a certified emergency manager, as I mentioned, through the IAEM International Association of Emergency Managers. I am a paramedic. I have actually been an EMT since I was 16 years of age. I started out as a volunteer fire and EMS person in my local hometown in Maryland, Bel Air volunteer fire company to get started. My first real job was that I was a police officer with the Harford County Sheriff's Department, spent 5 years there. And then I transitioned over, wanted to be a paramedic, a career paramedic. So I spent a year in Baltimore City Fire Department, on the streets there in Baltimore City. Went to Baltimore County Fire Department in 1986, where I spent several years on the street as a street paramedic. Went to the academy, taught paramedics. Emergency management was a part-time thing, saw many changes. Then I went to emergency management full-time my last 8 years, where I became a deputy director for Baltimore County Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. After retiring from the county in 2011, I went to the state of Maryland Emergency Management Agency, and I was an assistant director of operations. My primary role is that I manage the State Emergency Operations Center. Been with VOC now for about 4 years, where again I head up several areas for government sales. We'll talk about today what is a virtual EOC. Virtual EOC has actually become the new buzzword, especially after COVID. So it's basically, again, allows for collaboration and communication among an area of people where an incident management team is sitting in a physical EOC. It's the same thing as a physical EOC where you're able to converse, but we're doing it collaboratively. We're doing it virtually. Very different aspect maybe that you considered years ago, but again, still in a command structure. You can have different situations you're dealing with where not everyone is physically in the same location, where distancing practices need to be implemented. Virtual EOC was kind of a practice thing, things we talked about several years ago, but really never came to fruition, except maybe during a major snowstorm or things like that, where parts of your crew really couldn't get in, but had to be virtually. But now again, it's really what you need as you prepare for future epidemics, such as we just went through with COVID. So, what does a virtual EOC mean before COVID and after COVID? Kind of, again, communications. We have chat feeds, you have notifications, interaction between personnel, or email content flowing back into the central feed, managing public information. As you know, public information management, the PIO is a very crucial part of your operations, of your communication back to the public. Well, again, with this, you're doing much of this virtually. Data collection, situation statistics, ICS forms, employee status updates, database of asset information. Integration, maybe you want to integrate with other data sources that you don't have in your system, but you have them as part of you that you're able to bring in, such as even mapping, track location of staff working from home, track hotspots of where your incidents are occurring. If you have multiple incidents, being able to track where they are, and also being able to overlay other types of mapping situations or solutions directly into the system. Importantly, if you're requesting a resource and you want to know where that went, where it needs to be deployed, all that can be tracked on a map. But very importantly for the incident commander, again, they're able to see the incident on a map and actually lay out each of their response pieces and their apparatus and so forth, and their different resources that happen to be responding to the scene or set up at the scene. You're able to have that. Another example would be if you're able to pull up a map and look at an area that's been affected, you could tell where your nursing homes are, where your assisted livings, where your fire stations and hospitals are located. Process improvement, replicate processes with multiple steps digitally, resource requesting, work orders, any process needing approval. What we mean by that is you can start out requesting something, and maybe it has to go to someone else to be approved before it can be deployed. There's multiple aspects of permission-based approvals can be easily built in to a virtual EOC. And then really, again, monitoring continuously, looking for changes, and then planning for your recovery. Recovery, is really kind of starts as soon as the incident begins. You're already planning in your mind how to restore from the situation. Anthony, do you have anything to add to any of this information?
Yeah, absolutely. In my limited emergency management experience, communication always came up on every after action report. And I really think that that's where having a virtual EOC and a virtual environment shines, because you're not just concentrating on ICS forms and documenting there, and they certainly serve their purpose. But as technology progresses, we see other means of communication, whether it be emails, text messages, WebEx meetings, conference calls, things like that. And having a virtual EOC really allows you to keep all of those communication pathways centralized in one space where anybody that's involved in the incident can look back historically, see the communications that happened, see the conversations that happened regarding objectives, regarding any decision that was made, and have that audit trail or have that history. And I think that becomes important because, if we're talking about ICS forms, you're looking back through paper. And again, that serves a great need and not discounting that at all. But the communications that are kind of taken off of there between the emails, text messages, everything I mentioned, if you aren't on that email chain or you aren't on that text thread, you might be missing points of information. So keeping everything centralized in a virtual EOC allows, again, for that kind of look back to see where things were maybe prior to you being involved into that incident. And then when we talk about data collection and even using some of those ICS forms digitally rather than the paper version, it becomes a lot easier for the end users to input information and display it and make sure everybody has quick access to the most up-to-date version. If we're filling out a paper-based form, where does that current form sit? Where are the other, carbon copies, so to speak, of it? Who has access to them? If we do that digitally, it really exposes that information to everybody that's involved in managing the incident through a couple of clicks of the mouse. So I think just that communication and that information sharing aspect of a virtual EOC really takes a lot of what the audience here is already experts in to the next level and allows for that sharing to seamlessly happen across multiple people, multiple areas, whether that's geography or actual ICS sections. So definitely some good info there.
I'll give you two examples from my history. When I first started out in the Emergency Operations Center part-time when I was still at the academy, and we would go to the EOC for incidents or exercises, my initial job was a runner of messages. So I would take a message from one position or even a caller for our public inquiry center and take that and take that piece of paper and take it over to the appropriate EOC representative. Now that's all done electronically. Again, you're taking that, everyone is able to see it. But most importantly, it was another example of dealing with emergencies was Hurricane Isabel affected Baltimore County in Maryland, 2003. Significant flooding, really Cat 1 flooding for a tropical storm. Dealing with that incident, again, it lasted several days, really, when you get into recovery. But the initial phase, again, was pretty quick and really almost unexpected. But that one incident generated 2 file cabinets full of paperwork, of forms and papers. I remember during 5 years later of the audit from FEMA for the declaration of having to go through two file cabinets full of 4 drawers each of paperwork to actually find all the information that was required as part of the audit. Now, everything is done virtually. Everything is there. Everything is concise. There's no paper. Everything you're able to pull up records, you're able to search. So everything is done electronically, much easier. Again, that paper is not going to, again, in case of an emergency, it's not going to get wet. It's not going to catch fire. It's not going to be lost in some file cabinet or some boxes back in the closet. It's going to be there forever, and you're always able to have that information at your fingertips as needed. How do we ensure continuity across different time frames and incident management teams? I'll let Anthony go ahead and take this one.
Sure. So if you could just go to the next slide there, we have a couple of bullet points. A lot of what we just kind of mentioned plays into this. So the paper-based documentation, where is all that documentation being stored? Who has access to it? A lot of face-to-face meetings. Again, there's definite benefit in still obviously following the planning P and having all your meetings and bringing people together. But when we look back to COVID, that wasn't possible, right? We needed to stay separated. We couldn't have those face-to-face meetings. And that's where you saw a lot of the virtual meeting platforms kind of rise and things like that. But being able to not just replicate the face-to-face meeting with technology, but use technology to actually replace that face-to-face meeting and share the same information and make sure everybody is in the know is definitely a benefit. Handoffs between operational periods or shift changes, again, when we speak kind of strict ICS, right, and following that planning P, the 2 different teams are going to come together. They're going to discuss everything that happened. Those meetings can be lengthy, obviously, depending on the type of incident. Again, is everybody there, or all the stakeholders available to join that meeting? Having the virtual EOC makes that information available. So you're not waiting maybe until that handoff meeting to share that information. If somebody wants to log into the virtual EOC and kind of keep track of what's going on during the previous operational period, they can do so. And it just makes that knowledge of the incident, the knowledge of the decisions that are being made, the objectives, what needs to change, what's going well, brings it to the forefront and really allows you to see that information in real time. And like Mark mentioned, having all that documentation stored electronically, be able to pull that up at any time via a search for keywords by operational period, by which form it is, anything like that. There's great benefits there. Sharing that information on dashboards, having it, again, front and center for any of the key stakeholders that are involved. And then that running chat feed, I can't stress that enough. Communications is always going to be something, a hard expectation to meet, because some people will feel you over communicated, some people will feel you under communicated. And if all those communications are centralized in one place, it becomes almost self-service, and people can log in and look at it when they want and consume the information at their own pace, if you will.
I think one major win is that how often during an emergency you're getting constant calls from your bosses or elected officials. Hey, what's going on? Give me the information. Can you just give it to me? Give it to me straight. Tell me what's going on. Sometimes that happens at the most inopportune times. If you have this available, it's there all the time. Your elected officials or your bosses, whoever they report to, can actually get in and look and see what they want to see. I mean, everything is there. They don't have to sometimes worry about calling you every 15 minutes for status updates. Everything is real time. So they're able to get in, gather the information they need, and that's really going to make your job easier as you're running the incident.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of add on to that, having the ability to set up specific views on who can see what information, right? Elected officials, key stakeholders, you might want them to have access to everything, but when we talk about, Mark mentioned earlier, the PIOs and what information is being shared out, you can set up very specific dashboards to only show the information that you want that audience to see. So having that control over, these 10 data points should be exposed to the elected officials, and maybe only these 3 to anybody, the media or any outside agency or the public even through a public link. Is definitely doable and makes the job of the PIO and really anybody on that IMT team a lot easier for the exact reasons that Mark mentioned, that we're not then managing those phone calls and managing those expectations while also trying to manage the incident.
How do you capture areas for improvement when the crisis is over, after it isn't over yet? Vice versa. Lessons learned debriefs. Well, you're able to actually take that and have real-time feedback from your field, from your other personnel. So you're able to actually start your after-action report as the incident's going. And you may get some of this information. Hey, during the initial phases, maybe you learned lessons. There's things that you wish could have been made better. So you're actually able to track things. People are able to start listing items for the after-action review and after-action report. So real-time data collection allowing EOC decision makers to see what's working and what needs to be adjusted. Again, during an incident, there are going to be issues. Exercises are a great way to find problems or issues where maybe you need to remediate or just make them better. Again, if you run an exercise and it goes perfect, it really didn't give you everything you needed. You need to stretch it a little bit and find out where your weak spots are. Look for the vulnerabilities. You'd much rather have vulnerabilities found during an exercise than a real-life event. So mechanisms to capture feedback with your overall incident during the response, again, for your after-action reporting at a later date. So as you all know, again, immediately after the event, you're going to do a hot wash. You can start reviewing some of those key items that lessons learned, but also long-term of looking at these after-action items that can be addressed later and then remediated to make the next exercise or next event that does really actually occur to go much smoother. Anthony, anything to add?
Yeah, this was very important, I think, especially for a lot of the clients that I work with, specifically in healthcare during COVID. Probably the longest activation that we've all seen, and hopefully that we'll ever see. But you can't wait until the end of an incident like COVID to capture feedback. So having mechanisms in place for both frontline staff and also members of the IMT team to kind of start documenting along the way what's working and what isn't will make the job of whoever is tasked with writing the after action report after the incident a lot easier, because we're not going to remember a year and a half ago, right, what the challenges were on day one, week one, or even month one. So setting up a couple of simple forms and exposing those to frontline staff, IMT team members, any other key stakeholders became very important for people to have a mechanism to document that, you know, the communications, they wanted something different. Maybe some of the guidance wasn't clear, anything like that. And being able to assign those feedbacks or those areas for improvement, or even the strengths, to different buckets, I call them, right? So whether it's related to objectives or related to PPE, if we're talking about COVID or anything like that, becomes very important, because it gives you a lot of data points at the end to kind of look at your overall response and see where the different areas fell and see what adjustments need to be made. So I know this was very helpful for a lot of the healthcare clients that I work with, and also a lot of the municipal clients that we support as well, in being able to give a mechanism to give that real-time feedback and not wait until a hot wash at the end of the incident.
I'll give you two examples of ways that establishing an after-action report, AAR, actually helped significantly. True life examples. The winter of 2009-2010 in Maryland saw 3 blizzards. First blizzard occurred in December of 2009. Historic snowfalls. Did everything go perfect? No, we ran into some issues, but we were able to work through those. But we documented where the issues were. That same winter season, February of 2010, we had another very significant blizzard. Thanks to learning from what we did wrong or what we could have done better in the December 2009 blizzard, we were able to correct those. So the time it came to the February blizzard, things went much smoother, didn't have the same issues that we had during the first blizzard. So again, we were able to take a look at those after action items and remediate those. Luck haven't had to happen with us, I guess. Bad luck, but we had a third blizzard, same week as the second blizzard, later that week in February of 2010. This one was also an historical snow event where we actually beat the one in December. This one went well like clockwork. It happened to be, again, 3 blizzards, 2 within the same week, but thanks to a good after action reporting and mitigating the issues that were found, each one was significantly better. Another example was an incident at an actually it was the independent living 15-story high-rise that had to be evacuated. We had some issues evacuating everyone, getting everyone placed into a reception center and an eventual shelter. Unfortunately, or fortunately, 2 years later, same building had to be evacuated again due to another situation. But because, again, through the after-action reporting and after-action items that were able to be followed up on, that second incident 2 years later went significantly better for handling that situation of that 15-story independent living high-rise. Held our meetings, expectations, and communication, internal, external, etc. So internal, again, senior leadership, command center staff, EOC representatives. You'll find a lot of that. People run emergency operations centers multiple ways, but they have a senior leadership that they can make, maybe that's sometimes called the policy group. They can, again, see what they need to see, but many times important decisions are handled by them. Command center staff, again, your officials there who again, are going to kind of be above the EOC representatives. But the EOC reps are people who can represent their agency or their position for the agency that they work for, able to make the decision. So it's kind of like a pecking order, but really the work is done by the worker bees, which would be the EOC representatives. Externally, you have vendors who are able to supply resources that you may need. You have local jurisdictions, and you have media. So, who else can you think of really that would be involved with kind of your communications, internal, external, and so forth? But again, there's some examples of vendors, local jurisdiction, media. Vendors, private-public partnerships are very important. So that's really what you're going to see now as life goes on, is that private-public partnership. An example of that is we had a major water main break that affected parts of the county that lasted almost a week because of the water main that had to be found. But our public-private was actually having Walmart come in and deliver truckloads and truckloads of water-based potable water for people to be able to drink. So again, we were able to work as an emergency operations center in the county with our local EOC representatives, command center staff, to basically open up points of distribution to be able to supply water to the public as needed. So everything that you see listed here was very important. The media got the information out, ways that where the public could receive those bottled water and even non-potable water, meaning drinking versus non-drinking. Anthony, anything?
Yeah, I think that kind of something I mentioned earlier plays a part here, which is targeting messages and targeting data and targeting information to each one of these different audiences is important. Obviously, what senior leadership needs to see is different than what your vendors need to see. And having a virtual EOC allows you to set up those portals or those mechanisms and really target that information to the appropriate people through access controls and things like that. If I'm a vendor or I'm the media, I should not have access to log into and see what senior leadership, command center staff, or EOC representatives have visibility to. And it prevents confusion in the actual EOC through the PIO or the PIO office on what information could be shared with who. If that structure is put in place in advance and information is fed into those forms or into those dashboards, it's just there for those individuals to view and to consume. So it lessens that impact of, should I release this information to this person? Should I not? People just fill out the appropriate forms, and that information naturally becomes visible to the appropriate audience, which is a huge win and a huge time saver for the people managing the incident.
So how are you meeting expectations for communication internal? Leadership, command center staff, again, what data is needed to support the decision making? Identify key performance indicators so you can measure your success. Know your level of effectiveness. Be aware of meeting fatigue. EOC time can vary from jurisdiction or company to company and so forth, but majority will have usually a max time of 12-hour shifts. It can be 24 on, 24 off for the field personnel many times, but working in an EOC for 24 hours at a time is going to be very difficult. So again, it's going to vary, but normally most agencies will switch to a 12 on, 12 off to kind of relieve some of that meeting fatigue. Identify line staff. Set expectations that disasters are fluid situations. What do we mean by that? They're actually going to change. Nothing ever goes by a script book. You need to be, as they say, flexible Gumby, to be able to pivot to, as things happen, being able to roll with the changes and again, adjust what you're doing with that. Create a sense of truth. Be aware of message fatigue. So be honest. Take that information and share what you know. Again, being untruthful, you're going to get caught in a second. So again, just putting out truthful information that is believable. There's nothing worse than putting something out and then 3 hours later having to say you were sorry. So again, put information out, have it available to your constituents, to your personnel as we go through this. But again, message fatigue is you don't want to keep on repeating the same things. So maybe mix it up a little bit. Just change some of the language that you're doing. So being aware of what your target audience is all about and how to approach that. Anthony?
Yeah, just if I could expand on the source of truth. I think with the somewhat recent emergence of social media, that becomes a bigger challenge for organizations to do. There's going to be information out there on social media, sometimes being put out by agencies, with big names or organizations with big names behind them. And if that information is conflicting with what your organization is putting out, or if your organization hasn't yet put out a message, that can cause confusion for those frontline staff. And we're not necessarily talking about the people in the command center, your IMT team, but the people out there doing the job, managing day-to-day operations and things like that. So being able to create a source of truth, whether it be a dashboard, a URL, some sort of scheduled messaging frequency, things like that, gives your employees or your people a place to go to get your organization's take on what's happening and to get the guidance from your organization rather than seeing what's being done on social media, seeing what's being put out there, and them taking that as what should be happening. So it creates a level of understanding, I think, with the employee base and a level of trust with the employee base that's definitely important. And having a virtual EOC will allow you to set that up with data points from the actual incident management team and just flow that seamlessly into a dashboard or a portal for that employee base to go see that information.
And one feature of VOC is that we are able to create a fantastic joint information center area called a JIC, and that's where information can be shared with everyone putting out public information. So again, the different PIOs, the different representatives from the agencies are able to share information among themselves. So there's one concise message. It's not going to be messages that conflict with each other. So Joint Information Center, again, is where that can be kind of shared as one open platform internally before it goes out to the public, especially, or to your out to your personnel. So again, Joint Information Center allows the different agencies, different PIOs to communicate and get one clear, concise message versus conflicting with each other as they speak. How are meeting expectations for communication external? Start conversation with vendors and suppliers early and maintain often. The worst time to work with an EOC representative is during the event for the first time. It's all about relationships. I can't say that enough. Again, it's all about relationships. Emergency management is a relationship organization. And really, what is the emergency manager? What is the person that's bringing all this together? They're the band leader. They are the person who has all these different instruments at their feet, at their hands. Again, their different instruments are your EOC representatives. They're your agencies. They're your outside vendor suppliers. Develop those relationships. Know who they are. Attend meetings with them often. Again, nothing worse than 3 o'clock in the morning having to call somebody and ask him for a favor when you've never met this person before. So again, establish those relationships, those conversations early. What are reporting requirements to regulatory response agencies, especially in the nuclear industry, federal agencies? Again, you have certain statutes, certain ways, certain people and groups that you're required to know how to go through that process, who you need to follow up with. What are your regulatory requirements? Be aware of those. You can have a checklist of that with especially with a system like VOC modern software, a checklist to make sure you're hitting all those points that you need to do. Again, remember running several nuclear power plant exercises. The way to get through that especially since they're graded, is you have everything in a checklist, making sure you hit all your points, making sure everything is in your plan. And again, this is the time where you're going to have your plan. It's not just sitting on a shelf getting dusty. You can access those annexes, that plan, directly in the same system. It's like getting a book off the shelf. Everything is available digitally at your fingertips. Does your organization need to make a public statement to the media? What is the message? Depending on the situations, you can have some of these that are almost templates already built in, thinking of questions that are going to come up, thinking of ways ahead of time of what's going to be asked of the public, what's information you need to give to the public. Again, so a great way to start storing some of these templates and be ready for it. There's nothing worse than, again, not knowing an answer to something when really, again, all along you should have been planning your response, but also your information out to the public. Anthony?
I think you hit the nail right on the head there. Having those templates in place, and again, being able to set up those mechanisms to share that information kind of organically through things that are already being done in the EOC by the IMT team is huge, and eliminates the need to think about it at the time of the incident, and that information just naturally will flow into those areas for others to consume it.
Those checklists, again, are very important. It's great with checklists. You're able to have the checklist pre-built for each different type of emergency that you've been planning for. Some of these events are going to unfold over days. Maybe, as again, it is a tropical storm or a hurricane, for example, that may be occurring on the East Coast or parts of the Pacific Coast. Having that done days at a time, you're able to see that it was done and who did it. So everything is concise. Everyone has followed what needs to be done. If something is missing, you need to, again, go back and check that item off and make sure it's been done. Is an EOC, a virtual EOC, an essential tool? I believe it is. Again, it's the new world that we're in. It's really not much different than a in-person EOC. It's just everything happens to be virtually available also. So everything you need to operate as an in-person EOC is available to operate virtually. You're going to see more and more of that. You hear so much of employees not having to come to an office anymore. They're not going to be available when an event occurs at even 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday during work hours. People may be home. Work home-based offices. That's the new thing. So being able to come together virtually without having to go into a location is going to be the way that you're going to need to be able to operate at any time, any day, holidays, weekends, whatever else. So the idea is to have this virtual EOC tool that gives you everything that you need. The cool thing what you're seeing here is a dashboard. So you're able to set up things if you want to have a view of the dashboard and being able to put information in and see information easily at your fingertips. Anthony?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Absolutely. If you go to the next slide here, there's a couple of bullet points. So absolutely, I think a virtual EOC is an essential tool. I think pre-COVID, it was a nice-to-have feature. I think during COVID, everybody realized that it was a necessity. People were unable to gather, and there was a large incident that needed to be managed. To Mark's point, right, every operation now needs to be able to be done remotely as well. I shouldn't need to be in the EOC. Again, it's nice to have those face-to-face meetings, but sometimes that can't happen for various reasons. Maybe your EOC space is part of the incident and is impacted, and your backup is going to take some time to set up. You don't want to have to wait to start managing an incident. Through a virtual EOC, you can set that up and start managing just as if you were in your normal space. And again, many physical EOCs are small, unable to social distance. Hopefully that part of it's coming to an end. But there are still a lot of needs, or a lot of use cases, I should say, for why a virtual EOC is important. And when you do look at virtual EOCs, and you'll see a lot of different things out there, and a lot of them, if you truly look at it, I consider them reporting software, right? An EOC is a truly collaborative environment. And you don't want something that's just going to allow information to be inputted and allow people to see that information. I think where VOC shines is we allow this to be truly a collaborative environment, just like a physical EOC would be, where you can have conversations, you can make decisions as a team, expose whatever information needs to be exposed to whatever audiences it needs to be exposed to, and have that happen naturally. And through using a plan structure, right, we can take your plans, as you see on the screen here, and replicate them in the software. So if it's a hurricane, to Mark's point, versus a fire versus a flood, if there are different tasks that have to be done at different time periods during that incident, that can all be inputted into the software and displayed at the appropriate timeframes, just as you were looking at your paper IRG or incident response guide. If your organization doesn't have an IRG, which is highly unlikely with the group we're speaking to here, just some data points there on things to consider. But knowing that these can be leveraged in both real world incidents and you could use the same plans in exercises, I think is a good way to make sure your plan is up to speed and will work when you do need to deploy it for a real world incident. And Mark, I'll turn it back over to you for the recap.
Sure. So real-time data collection and feedback, very important. Again, real-time information. That's what you need so that you can make informed decisions. Having that at your fingertips. Common operating picture is the term that's been around for a while. Being able to have everything there that you need. And that's the most important. The incident commander needs to have that information to provide the best response. And he's going to reach out with that information and share it with his EOC representatives. As I mentioned earlier, the EOC manager is really the band leader. And every representative are pieces or instruments as part of that band. So what's great is, again, they can pull all the pieces together, all the representatives, and help form music as we go through that. Controlling and improving communication. Again, source of truth. You have everything to back up what you're saying. You have that information. You have that mapping. You have that outside information coming in. You have the representatives who have people in the field who are giving them the information to feed the situational awareness. Keep up and replan as communication changes. Again, nothing ever goes as planned. One of the famous lines my emergency manager, my director, said to me right in the middle of an event, wow, this does not end up, or this is not going as the way we had worked out a plan for it. It's not like the last one that we had that started out the same exact way. Nothing ever does. Flexible Gumby was a term that someone used years ago in emergency management, and it's so true. What's kind of helped me is, again, I've been a paramedic for many years, and you're following algorithms. So again, be able to go down this road, go down that road, go down that side road. Don't get trapped at a dead end street. So being able to quickly go to your plans for this and that. So regroup, replan, and be ready. Be always aware that things are going to change. Nothing ever goes as expected. A virtual EOC can become an invaluable tool in your toolbox. Again, we're not going to be in physical locations as much anymore. You don't not maybe have paper-based maps, paper-based forms. Everything is there. Everything is able to be updated. Everything is able to be shared with everyone at the same time. As Anthony mentioned earlier, you're working the 12P to 12A shift. You're in the middle of your off time. There's no time or no real reason to have to come in many times and have an extended briefing on what's happened in the last 12 hours. You can get in there at any time and find out exactly what's happening anytime that you want. So when you come on the shift, you are fresh, up to date, just like everyone who's been working that event. But again, the big difference is here, you're fully rested. You're able to actually hit the ground running when you come in for your shift. So it's a great way, again, to have everything at your fingertips, and the documentation is done for you. No more, again, of file cabinets, of having information that you've got to look through multiple paper files to find the information that you're required to have for your audit, or just, again, being able to provide information for your disaster Again, let's just say you have a declaration and FEMA needs certain documentation. It's all about documentation before you can get reimbursed. So having that information readily at your fingertips. Just another example of that was requesting documenting your pricing, your cost. Immediately when, for example, the fire representative in the EOC says effective at 1400 hours this date, we are activating our snow emergency plan within the fire department. What that meant was every ambulance that went out now had a fire engine that went with them as personnel to get through the heavy snow. At that point, again, your number of personnel increased, your cost increased because you're putting personnel out for personnel with a piece of apparatus, and that documentation was needed to offset the cost for the reimbursement. So immediately, again, you're able to get into the report, into your paperwork, and see exactly when that plane was activated and when it was lifted. So great way to, again, capture information that you're going to need later to prove certain things to your auditors, people who are overlooking what you have done. Anthony?
No, I think, again, your comments were perfect, and I just want to thank everybody for joining us today.
So thank you very much. If you guys have general questions, feel free to reach out. This is the company email, info@voc.com, and that is our Raptor. That's our company logo. But again, thank you all very, very much for watching our presentation, and we look forward to hearing your questions that we can help you with. Thank you.
Mark and Anthony, thank you so much for your presentation and for being with us today. We certainly value the relationships we've built with VOC and your support of EMI-SIG. Please send any questions you have to Mark and Anthony in the email that they provided. I'm sure they'll be happy to respond to you promptly. Thank you once again, Mark and Anthony. This concludes this session, but remember that it is recorded and you can view it again anytime. Remember to complete your survey to confirm your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session presented by Jordan Arnswald and Darren Schneider, entitled Resilient Communications for the Emergency Operations Center. And join us this afternoon for today's virtual social hour. It's a formal night and costume party, so surprise us. See you then. And oops, helps to unmute. Well,